We have seen a little bit of green shoots coming through in the potential re-entry of these talks between the US and China. How worried are you in terms of your business about a potential escalation of these trade disputes, or do you think that we could actually see some resolution come through?
Oh, good morning and thank you for the time. I think this is great. Look, we're obviously always concerned about anything that relates around trade. The news overnight, obviously you've seen Asia markets this morning react positively, not so much in the US last night. But as long as there's a dialogue and we get to somewhere positive, we'll get to a good resolution, we hope. We're here in Singapore, the Milken Conference. Everything that you listen to is around trade and growing those different relationships together. So we're hoping for a better outcome and a better dialogue as we go into the end of the year.
And a better outcome, a better dialogue, what does that mean for China economic growth? Has your mainland China strategy changed somewhat amidst what we've seen in the last several months?
No, we've got a long-term view on China. That strategy hasn't changed. Obviously, certain industries are going to be impacted depending on the extent of where those talks go and what level of effort is put onto individual industries. That being said, the China story is not changing, and the China regional story that we see here in ASEAN is not changing as well.
Speaking of the region, it's interesting that as a head of an international private bank, you are based in Asia, not New York, not Europe. So you certainly see Asia as the forefront of growth.
Totally. I mean, we have a global view of the world. Our clients are really demanding that we are intellectually knowledgeable and we have the intellectual capital around what's going on, be it in Latin America, be it in Europe, be it in Asia, or obviously the US. Asia is the fastest growing region of the world, and we believe that Hong Kong is one of those central efforts. The bank is committed to Hong Kong, and the bank is committed to Asia, and I find it extremely powerful to be there at the moment. And although I spend a lot of time outside the region, always nice to be back in the region.
Yeah, absolutely. Fellow Aussie, of course. We have seen, as you mentioned, these green shoots coming through, particularly today in Asian markets, but we were on the longest losing streak in 16 years, and there's such a divergence, unlike what we saw in the synchronicity of 2017. So do we see this divergence continue, or do we start to see a peak around in some of these heavily beat years?
Well, it's a great point. The divergence between developed markets, particularly between the US, which has had very robust growth in equity markets this year, and emerging markets, is really the story around these trade discussions. Smaller countries that may be on the periphery of China, obviously concerned, and there's other idiosyncratic issues that are involving those particular countries. That being said, the China story for the last 10 days until today, we've seen that long sell-off that you alluded to. That's all about concern and worry. And when we get positive news out of the US, you see those markets turn around like they did today. Again, the long-term story of growth and what's happening in productivity in terms of technology, in terms of healthcare, in terms of retail, is the story that's growing, and that's very evident here at the Milken Conference in Singapore.
So are you hedging at all, or are you just still taking this long-term macro view?
No, at JPMorgan, we take a very diversified view to how we invest on behalf of our clients. So we're across a broad spectrum of markets. Obviously, developed markets take the precedence there. That being said, we're in different asset classes, and those asset classes react in different ways to some of these volatile and different type of market scenarios we're seeing. But when you have a diversified program, you tend to get through in a more balanced view than maybe if you take concentrated bets on some of the things that we're seeing in some of the more difficult parts of the global capital markets. What's
the sweet spot for private banking for JPMorgan? How much assets do you need to have?
Well, we don't really talk about how many assets, but we have a very robust overall asset allocation I talked about. Some of those asset classes require certain minimums, so we'd be at the higher end. That being said, we are totally focused on bringing holistic services to clients right around the world that involve our balance sheet, using capital where needed. Obviously, our asset management business, we're part of the asset management division of JPMorgan, and then our holistic trusted advisor services that we use. So that generally means that we're at the upper end of the spectrum, but we're totally focused on this region particularly in growing out the new and developing entrepreneurial class, again, very evident here in Singapore.
Any particular countries, particularly maybe in Southeast Asia, that you're seeing some strong growth stories coming from?
Yeah, well, look, we obviously are big fans of Singapore. The governance, the ingenuity, the entrepreneurship in Singapore is without, and that's lifted the rest of this ASEAN region. The Indonesia's been a great story, picked up on the back of China. I think a lot of the things going on in Indonesia, other countries in the region have picked up on. There is a World Economic Forum conference going on right now in Hanoi. I think that's very evident that the whole region is picking up on the idea idea of innovation, entrepreneurship. And some of the things actually earlier this morning that were discussed were really talking about developed markets and falling behind in educational access for all. I think that's something that's converging here. As we get more opportunities for education, we get more opportunities for some of this great entrepreneurship we're seeing principally driven out of China in technology, but you're seeing a lot of that here in Southeast Asia as well.
So just very quickly, Andrew, final question. You do seem very quite bullish about potential growth. You expect that the growth momentum in Asia will continue into 2019?
Yeah, we're very bullish long-term on the growth fundamentals of Asia. That being said, we're extremely cognizant of discussions in the US with China. That will cause some ripples. We're also cognizant of individual markets facing their own issues. As the US raises rates, which we anticipate will probably be at least 2 more rate rises this year, that may lead other countries, whether they be in Asia or other places, to raise rates. That's going to cause some concerns of volatility.